Good morning, everyone. Distinguished audience, I will briefly comment on a contribution to the engineering of Argentine secondary schools. Contemporary education is caught in a structural paradox. The institution designed to prepare students for the world has become increasingly estranged from it. While students live within a network reality, fluid, collaborative, and digital saturated, the schools continues to operate under the logic of 19th century industrial designs. Robust linear transmission, a fixed canonical curriculum, and assessment as a mechanism of classification rather than growth. This is not merely an organizational inconvenience, it represents a crisis of philosophical legitimacy. The school looks like a factory, the world in artists' workshops. This is the central tension this framework seeks to address. The question, crucially, is not how to introduce more technology into classrooms, but how to fundamentally rethink the function of the school in an age when knowledge is not longer scarce and war asset but distributed, stable and collectively produced practice. The epistemological factors. The inherited education model treats knowledge as a fixed body of content to be transmitted from teachers to students. The curriculum functions as an immutable canon. The school's position itself a fortress, self-sufficient, isolated, and protective of its epistemic authority. Again, this stance, the daily reality of students' cognitive and communicative lives. They navigate the network, multidirectional knowledge flows, collaborative platforms, algorithm curation, and provisional conceptual insight. These fractures between two epistemological regimes is not superficial, it is structural. Paulo Freire diagnosed its political dimension decades ago through his critique of banking education, the practice of depositing inert knowledge into passive recipients. What has changed in this case and visibility of the contradiction? The network environment has made it apparent to an entire generation that experience the much Fistland every day. Theoretical foundation, a triangle of connection. The network schools draws on three intersecting theoretical traditions that together forms what the framework calls the theory of connection. The first is critical pedagogy, particularly as a development by Freire and Giroux. Freire ideology pedagogy insists that knowledge is always produced in relation between teacher and students, between text and context, between school and community. Giroux extends this into a theory of democratic resistance. The school must be a set of democratic practice, not merely of social reproduction. The school, in this view, is a space for the critical co-construction of knowledge. The second is media ecology, especially as developed in the Latin American context by Carlos Scolari, rather than treating technology as a neutral tool. Media ecology understands digital environments as ecosystems, complex, evolving, and constitutive of the way we think, learn, and communicate. Digital environments are not supplementary to learning. They are the habitat in which learning increasingly takes place. The school must learn to read this environment critical, neither embracing them uncritically nor defensively shutting them out. The theory draws of my professor Francesco Fattorello theory of social communication, specifically his concept of the active receiver, against model that cast audience as passive consumers. Fattorello insists on the co-participatory nature of meaning making. Applies to education. This recontextualizes the student not as the vessel to be filled, but as a co-producer of knowledge, a prosumer of culture and meaning. All these three traditions converge on a shared insight. Knowledge is relational, distributed and dialogic. The school that embodies these insights is the network school. Then, core concepts from container to interface. The central metaphor of the framework is the shift from containers to interface. The fortress school stores knowledge and dispenses it under controlled conditions. The network school is a permeable, dynamic node that mediates between different knowledge registers, academic and popular, local and global, scientific and experiential. Its primary function is not to store or transmit knowledge, but to translate, facilitate, and amplify exchange across knowledge layers. The frameworks operate thought two complementary principles. The first, the classroom as words. Understand the classroom as deliberative microcosms of the real, a laboratory for researching ethical conflicts, civic participation, and critical reasoning in relative safety. The second, the world as classroom. Understand the city, the territory, and life experience as educational texts in their own rights to be read, analyzed, and transformed. Together, these generate an epistemology of expanded experience in which learning spans context, language, and communities. A critical caveat applies. Pedagogical openness must not shift responsibility into vulnerable families. Equity demands institution and committing, not mere aspiration. As the heart of the model is conversation as the primary engine of learning, open thought intellectually, connection across language, source, and cultural registers, multidirectionality, disrupting one-way transmission in a favor of network exchange, and sense generation, the collaborative provision and production of meaning, thought, dialogue. We can think in this moment about ecosystemic pedagogy and new roles. The practical expression of the network school is ecosystemic pedagogy, which repositions the school as a critical resource, a space that does not merely consume or reproduce culture, but actively analyze, curates, and transforms it. Four strategic competencies define this approach: algorithmic analysis, examining how algorithms shape information, environment, and in whose interests. Interface, semiotic, reading digital interface as ideological texts that embed assumptions about user interaction. sociability analysis, evaluating how platforms shape human relation and social capital, and critical cartography, mapping the ownership, governance, and power structures of digital platforms. These strategies aim not a narrow digital literacy, but a genuine critical agency, political and epistemological. The teacher role shifts accordingly from sole authority and transmitted to interface designer and conversation curator. The teacher's plan experience that bridges disciplines, communities, and knowledge register and moderates dialogue to ensure that brothers that mere speed. The students' roles shift from passive consumer to reflexive prosumer and everyday ethnographer, developing interpretive agency, the capacity to remix and resignificate media, critical literacy, understanding algorithm-based and attention economies, and identity management, deliberately constructed one's digital footprints as an intentional practice rather than accidental trace. We can think technology as infrastructure, not goal. A persistent misunderstanding frames educational transformation as primarily a technological change. The network school insists otherwise. The real challenge is pedagogical. Technology functions as infrastructure to amplify conversation, connect classroom to external experts and communities in real time, and archive and involve institutional memory. The goal is to move from accidental hybridity, the chaotic and flexible mixing of digital and analog practice, to intentional connection, a deliberately designed ecosystem in which every technological choice serves a clear pedagogical purpose. This requires not a new device, but new pedagogical imagination. Toward connective democracy, the ultimate version of the framework is cognitive democracy, a condition in which the capacity to participate in the distribution, circulation, and transformation of knowledge is equitably distributed. This demands epistemological hospitality, genuine openness to indigenous, popular, scientific, and artistic epistemic tradition as equally valid contributors to shared knowledge. Cognitive justice, active counteration of epistemic coloniality and cultural hierarchies that determine what knowledge counts, and relational responsibility, understanding inclusion not as access to a pre-existing system, but as genuine agency within it. The challenge is not to suppress that disruptive energies of network culture and epistemic plurality, but to channel it to turn fires into torch. The network school is not a blueprint, but a practice, the art of building futures together in conversation across the fractures that divide us. The task is not merely educational, it is fundamentally political. Well, this is the end. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.